Jay, what happens to the town of Bethlehem? They're like the monkey in the middle here. Nobody is protecting them.
Well, that's why I was really pleased with what my committee did, because the more important aspect was the material modification, which says, wait a minute, let's really look at the design and make sure there are no flaws so that Bethlehem would not get harmed. And this was a policy that, frankly, our committee came to the conclusion, my committee, that it transcended Bethlehem, with all due respect to Bethlehem, and that this could be New London, it could be Newbury, it could be any town. And so what we were basically saying was, this is a policy that we really should get on the ground now and not run away from.
So can I share the dirty little secret? And I think Bethlehem kind of knows it.
What's that?
Is that it would never happen in New London. It would never happen in Exeter. It would never happen in Bedford. Because the problem is, this is the North Country. And what everyone knows in the North Country is they're in another planet. And that people think that somehow the 2,500 people in Bethlehem are expendable, as if this won't come near them. And I think that's part of the issue. And if you don't protect the Bethlehem, you're probably right. It means that this pattern and practice of what we've done in this community now means that every town is potentially ripe for the plucking, because your community's policies be damned, because DES gets to decide what's in the best interest of all of us. And I guess I need to ask you, Martha, so how good do you feel about the Department of Environmental Services? Are they there to protect our collective interests, or are they there to protect the rights of businesses?
I think that they think the state is one entity, and they have forgotten that the state is actually the communities that make up the state. That's really, and the people that are there. And I think that if they had some leadership, if there was some leadership that actually sat back down and said, wait a minute, this may be good for the state as a whole, but it's a pretty horrible thing for the 2,500 people that live in Bethlehem, and those people are just as important as the whole, because they make up the whole, then we might see something happen. But I think that the preemption is the most important thing to them. Throughout the process in the legislature, we heard that at every hearing from DES. Now they did finally step back.
What DES says that DES says there is this thing called NIMBY. Nobody wants an incinerator. Nobody wants a landfill. Nobody wants anything in the way of a dirty industry. And yet, as much as it is that we all have to live together on this planet, somebody's going to get stuck.
Well, somebody who may not mind that. If you look at the city of Rochester, they rely on the landfill in the city of Rochester. It's very important to them. They get $4 million in their city budget from waste management, from having that located in their community. They have a community advisory board that's set up that takes care of the quality of life issues. They have a host community agreement where they cannot operate.
Bethlehem mirror what's happening in Rochester, and why do you have to step in with a piece of legislation?
Well, we had to step in almost like Solomon. I don't mean to pat myself on the back, but what we really essentially did is say, look, whether it's a private landfill or a public landfill, and public landfill obviously doesn't meet the same criteria, because how can you sue yourself? But when it's a private landfill, what we're saying is, we realize that we're going to have to get into some public-private partnerships. Let's get this policy on the ground, and let's have communities talk with businesses in an appropriate manner and deal up front with each other, so that we don't have this problem in the future. So that we actually would encourage what I call good business models.
And if I can just step off of that for a minute, because the difference between City of Rochester and the town of Bethlehem is that there is no infrastructure in the town of Bethlehem other than a volunteer board of volunteer board. There is no town manager, public health officer, environmental health officer, and all of those people that you can say, your job is to watch that landfill, monitor those wells, look at those public safety issues, respond to this, get in touch with DES. We have to rely upon a volunteer board of selectmen to do that work. There's no capacity for this.
Vulnerability on the part of Bethlehem that doesn't exist in Rochester. And if there's vulnerability, then Jay, isn't there an obligation that the public policy step in? Because if you're not in Manchester and you're not in Rochester, you're not in Nashua, then damn it all, just because you're small and remote doesn't mean you should be stepped on.
And do not have influence or wealth to go along with it.
The other thing too is, even if you are Manchester or Rochester, establishing the very simple policy of a host community agreement, putting in procedures of mediation and arbitration so that neither side spends inordinate amounts of money, and going through this in a very sane and rational process was light years ahead of the situation we have now. I mean, just light years.
But Jay, you are telling me that what you were asking, and in this bizarre community of conference where it was like a conga line of lobbyists that were hanging out in there, which obviously tells you that the community is not going to win. I mean, because you know there's too much money in that room, and the money isn't on their side, it's on the other side. But you weren't asking for something that was unique. You were asking for something that you've seen in places like Maine. You were asking for something where people are weighing the balance. They understand we do have to deal with solid waste. We do have to deal with private interests, but that there can't be a public be damned kind of operation in New Hampshire, because in the end we're all potentially vulnerable to that.
I mean, this is sort of what I call institutional arrogance, and it kind of drives me crazy. This happened with the quarry bill that we had as well, and it's sort of the state saying, oh, no, you can't interfere in the permitting process. There's almost sort of this paternalistic attitude, and I think that's sort of a wrong attitude to take. But I mean, that's just for a different program, I suppose.
So, but Martha, here's the question. Bethlehem keeps challenging this.
Yes.
They've won in court. They don't have the same kind of infrastructure, as you mentioned, that Rochester has. They tried to get this bill through. They couldn't get beyond the 15.
Got it through.
You got it through, but you couldn't get beyond the 15 lobbyists in the room where, there is no public process.
And we should talk about that, because that was very interesting.
But here's my point. What is the role, then, of the Department of Environmental Services? Because if it turns out that we blow our wad with them, and that they are the public policy, they are the pushback on what happens to the private sector, because you can't push them back within the community. You have to rely on DES. What is DES told to do? Well, who sets the framework for them?
What I've done already is I've anticipated this problem, and I've anticipated it in dealing with solid waste, trash, garbage. And my committee has been working now for about a month and a half. They've been meeting regularly on a weekly basis, and they've been reviewing the entire solid waste rules, and they're going to come up internally with recommendations on what to change. Much of what we've learned from the Bethlehem problem hopefully will be applied to that. So we're taking what's called the legislative proactive step, and we're designing the policy where it should be designed in the legislature.
I was talking to a state senator, and she was telling me that what blew her mind was that she went back into the history of DES, because to some extent, the story of DES really is the story of how we've approached this thing. Everyone thought the Department of Environmental Services was really kind of there to be a judge, to look at the public and protect the public and look at the private, make sure that they got a fair shot, but that it was really in almost this judicial capacity. And she said, and as she started doing her homework and looking at the backstory behind DES, what she suddenly found out was that DES really didn't exist for the public per se. It was there to make sure that whatever private interests were coming into New Hampshire would in fact get a fair shake. So in some ways, they're almost like an advocate for the private parties, as opposed to kind of this judicial concern that would weigh both parties, the public and the private. If that's how DES's head was initially, does it make sense today for us to continue to have DES play that pivotal role when they really are not necessarily a good arbiter of what is really a community need versus a private interest? And Martha, does that mean going back to square one?
I don't know that we want to go back to square one, but we have put them in a conflicting position, just like you've outlined, where we're asking them to develop our solid waste capacity, and at the same time we're asking them to permit and regulate that capacity. But it's a conflict.
It sounds like Arthur Anderson.
Well,
think about it. Arthur Anderson was told to do the accounting, and then there was the auditing, and then there was to do the consulting. And what happened to Arthur Anderson is it doesn't exist anymore, because you can't be in potential conflict and ultimately either protect your client or protect your state. Jay, you're the chair of Environment and Agriculture. If DES is a walk-in conflict, then why do we sit there and pretend that it can actually protect communities when it would be impossible for it to do it? Is it time to say we need to maybe adjust really what their role is in all of this, and not put everything into their lap?
Well, yes, basically, and that's one of the reasons I have my committee start looking at that one section of rules and statutes dealing specifically with this issue. It goes back to just about anything. What DES is very good at is they're good at analyzing the science, if you will, of the technical aspects. What they shouldn't be doing is making subjective decisions based on that, and presently that's what they are doing, is making subjective decisions. And unfortunately, the subjective decisions, I think in some cases, are putting the people at risk in the state.
Before I let you go, Martha, you said that the community of Bethlehem is conflicted on this, that this has created a real schism in this tiny town of 2,500 people. Is the schism about money? Or is this schism about the environment? Is it about control? Is it about jobs?
I think it's about all of those things. I think what we've had is a community that is really tired. They're worn out from fighting this. They have voted 18 times not to expand or allow expansion of this landfill. And yet here we go again. We're going to come back and they're going to get what they want. And this community, some people are more tired than others, and they've decided that maybe I could just pretend this doesn't exist. And I need to really focus, this group needs to focus on our swimming pool that isn't, that's a mess. The kids can't swim in it, it's been closed. This is a pool that I took lessons when I was a kid.
So we have a pool and we
no
have a
place for
solid
the
waste
kids
facility.
to swim. Our fire and safety building needs to be fixed. You know, all of these things in the town of Bethlehem. And some people just want to focus on that
And move on.
And there are others that still have some energy left.
I need to let both of you go, but thank you very much. We'll keep tackling
Thanks.
this issue.
Okay.
Well,